Palestinians in Gaza have endured a man-made humanitarian disaster for years. Israel's targeting of homes, schools and hospitals has robbed generations of a future. From a declared famine in August to the emergence of the first case of polio in 25 years, nearly 70% of Palestinians are dependent on food aid. And it's Gaza's youngest who continue to suffer the most. On day 4 of our series, Gaza, Promises and Reality, we're looking at the scale and scope of the humanitarian crisis. It's over now to Tariq Abu Azoum and the team in Gaza.
Hello and welcome to a special coverage live from Deir al-Balah. Today we are looking at the humanitarian crisis that has unfolded across the Strip since Israel launched its genocidal war. The situation here is nothing less than catastrophic. Most Palestinians are dependent on aid and food to stay alive. Safe drinking water is not easy to come by. Neither is a home to live in or a school learn at. Under the principles of the international humanitarian law, every child has the fundamental right to education. Most children learn in makeshift schools like this one. This school used to be a hub for hundreds of Palestinian students who have been trying to get education, and this area was booming with the sound of the classes and children laughter. But now we can say that more than 97% of the schools have been damaged or destroyed. More than 90% of those require major rehabilitation or complete reconstruction before they can function again. The World Bank says it will cost $870 million to rebuild Gaza's education facilities. There are around 700,000 children in the Strip who have missed formal education for nearly 3 years in a row. I'm joined now by Shihab Abdelaziz, a Palestinian student who has been really struggling to receive education during the eruption and the beginning of the genocide here in Gaza. Thank you so much, Shihab, for your time. I know that you have been really struggling to study over the past 3 years under the sound of the drones, under the threat of repeated displacement. But recently we started to see that the concepts and the language of war started really to take shape and to impact on Gaza students. Could you give us your take on this?
Yeah, surely. Well, the language has changed dramatically over the past 3 years, because previously we used to always talk about stuff like our future prospects, university plans and stuff like that. But I was also part of that because I have graduated with a GPA of 99.1% in 2025, and I was full of dreams for my higher education. But now, after these 3 years of continuous war, I feel like we have been forced, sadly, to completely set aside those aspirations and go into a strict, non-stop survival mode. Now, when we live in such situations, life is really hard to then focus on other things like education. So then the focus shifts to entirely basic necessities that no one should ever really have to think about, such as finding and securing water, finding wood for fire, or even getting enough food for the day to sustain you. So that is how the language has different completely from what it used to be 3 years ago.
And from your own perspective, do you think that language itself could really be a record of war, preserving like the history after the end of the fighting?
Well, yes, the answer is a definitive yes, because language itself is shaped by history, and it is the ultimate record of what a society endures. If we look at our current vocabulary, we can see a clear proof that history always repeats itself, as we always say. If we look at our current reality, we can see this by directly linking our situation to the 1948 Nakba. Words like Nakba, displacement and refugee camps have always carried and preserved that initial historical trauma for generations, passing down the memory from parents to children, keeping it alive and telling the future generations about what we suffered from all these years.
And Shab, you plan to leave Gaza, but now there are still different obstacles regarding the opening of Rafah crossing and the ability for you to move out.
Definitely, yes. I have finished Tawjih, as I said, and I wanted to continue further studies, study medicine, but right now I can't do any of that because the borders are all closed.
Thank you so much, Shab, for your contribution with us today. As Shab said, life is still filled with different obstacles in terms of the ability for students to leave Gaza for education. But here in Gaza, a generation of children is growing up learning the language of war, a legacy of this genocide that children like Banias Humaid will carry with them. I went to meet her and her family in Gaza City.
This is Camp 1 and Camp 2. And that's the Camp 3 and Camp 4.
At 10 years old, Banias Humaid knows the displacement camps in her neighborhood the way other children might know nearby parks or schools.
Unfortunately.
Israel's war on Gaza has changed the language of her childhood. From her balcony overlooking rows of makeshift shelters, Banias writes some of the words she had to learn: tent camp, ceasefire, displacement.
During the war, I heard so much terms that I never heard before in my regular life before the war, such as rebel, destroyed building, drones, quad capture. Quad capture actually is one of the most terrifying words I ever heard in the war.
Banias is part of a generation of Palestinian children here in Gaza growing up with limited access to formal schooling.
I always think of the children, how they're displaced, how they left without education, left without playing. Kids just in my age now are supposed to be focusing on education, on their life, playing. They should be eating food, living in homes, having sweet dreams, but now no, they're living in tents.
Children are able to find some moments of relative normalcy at makeshift schools like this one. Inside, they dance dabka, they laugh, they play. But many young people are becoming fluent in the language of war before learning the language of exploration and discovery.
Such terms were once associated with older generations and were only heard in the news, but they have now become a lived reality. These terms often leave students trapped in a cycle of instability. They constantly feel under threat.
Educators say prolonged exposure to conflict affects on the way children learn and communicate.
The camps Banias counts from her balcony may one day disappear. But the words this war has planted in the minds of a generation may remain far longer. Tariq Abu Azzoum, Al Jazeera, Gaza City, Palestine. Now, nobody wants to send their child to school on an empty stomach. To be able to feed your child is the most basic of human rights. But here in Gaza, it's not guaranteed. In October's ceasefire deal, a minimum of 608 trucks were meant to enter the Strip every day. The UN's aid chief, Tom Fletcher, says no more than about 100 trucks now make it each day. In reality, Israeli authorities continue to heavily restrict what goes in and who comes out, as Lina Bouaka explains.
For nearly 2 decades, Israel has controlled who and what enters Gaza. Not just people, but food, water, fuel, and medicine. And since October 2023, it has cut back much of that access. More than 2 million people rely on 3 crossings: Erez, Rafah, and Karam Abu Salem. That's the main entry for food, fuel, and medicine, and it only opens irregularly. Under the October ceasefire, Israel agreed to allow up to 608 trucks into Gaza each day. But officials say restrictions are still in place, and only about 1/3 of those promised deliveries have been allowed in. The result? A hunger crisis. Doctors Without Borders say Israel's restrictions have led to alarming levels of malnutrition. Virtually all of Gaza faces food insecurity. And Palestinians say even when some aid does enter, accessing it is another challenge. With an 80% of unemployment rate, many cannot afford to buy flour, let alone fresh produce. Israel's restrictions haven't only affected food. Clean water has almost disappeared. The hospitals that remain are barely functioning. Equipment has been damaged, and many much-needed parts are restricted from entering. Aid groups say Israel has also restricted the entry of materials people need for makeshift shelters. Around 1 million people are now living in tents, many forced to move again and again. Israel says security concerns justify the controls on aid and other supplies. But humanitarian organizations, the UN, and Palestinians in Gaza tell a different story. And for many of them, survival still depends on whether the next aid truck makes it through.
Palestinians' ability to grow their own food is shrinking by the day. As well as restricting imports, Israel has destroyed or occupied more than 95% of Gaza's arable farmland. Fresh fruits and vegetables cannot be found or are too expensive for most people here, as my colleague Muad al-Kahlout reports.
The war on Gaza has hit the agricultural sector hard, and the entry of essential farming supplies into Gaza has been blocked since October 7. Iyad al-Falit cultivates what remains of his land, but he says the expanding area under Israeli military control is steadily encroaching on his farm. He says he refuses to abandon his fields, determined to support his extended family and preserve his livelihood.
The yellow line has taken about 4 hectares of mine. I am currently cultivating just over 1 hectare adjacent to the yellow line, despite the harassment by the Israeli army.
Figures from the Gaza government media office show a dramatic decline in farmland. The total area has fallen from approximately 9,300 hectares to just 400 hectares since 2023. 85% of greenhouses have been destroyed. More than 94% of agricultural land has been damaged, leaving only about 5% available for cultivation. The impact extends beyond the destruction of farmland. Farmers are also struggling to plant, while the restrictions remain on the entry of essential supplies including fertilizers, seeds, and other products. Inside his greenhouse, Muhammad Abu Gharaba watches his crops deteriorate due to shortages of pesticides. The leaves that were once green are gradually turning yellow, threatening his harvest and the income it provides.
Medicines are very expensive, and we are also suffering from water shortages. If I wanted to get a power generator, it would cost me a lot. There are no fertilizers available. This crop has been ruined.
Most farmers are struggling to preserve what remains of a sector that was once central to the Strip's food supply and economy. Behind every crop grown here in Gaza is a Palestinian farmer trying to overcome a growing list of challenges, from access to land and water to shortages of supplies. Many say the future of agriculture here has been never more uncertain. Muad al-Kahlout, Al Jazeera, from central Gaza, Palestine.
That's all from me, Tariq Abu Azzoum, and the team here in Gaza for now. I will be back later in the day, but for now, it's back to Doha.